I welcome to the podium our speaker, Lou Lataif. As noted in the biography at your place setting, Lou is the Dean of the School of Management at Boston University. He has been there since 1991, and his speech today is on the art of business. Please welcome Dean Lataif.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I thank you very much for inviting me, and then for showing up to listen. The subject I will explore, as Mark explained, is what I call the art of business. And I hope this will just be a pump primer for you to stimulate some questions, so we can have a dialogue at the end. But now you have to put up with the soliloquy. I should spell out what I mean by the art of business. It refers to an understanding of management systems, namely what is measured and what is rewarded. The management system of an organization can be analogized to the nervous system in the human body. It transmits a kind of electrical impulse that signals the muscles, or in the case of an organization, the people, to react. So here when I say understanding, I mean appreciating both the potential and the limitations inherent in the management systems. That is, what you measure and what you reward. Secondly, the art of business includes an ability to anticipate the knock-on effects of decisions on other decisions, what we call at the school thinking systemically or horizontally. Thirdly, it involves an informed intuition about a business, what I would like to call a feel or a nose for a business. And finally, the business art also relates to the soft skills, like visioning, imagining possibilities, making rain. Making rain is generating a top line, not simply managing the bottom line. The art of business also involves one's interpersonal skills and what I call the genius for execution. So I'll try to explain a little bit about each of those. By way of background, business schools like ours at Boston University have for decades taught the science of business. In fact, many call their degrees in management science. Maybe some of you hold degrees in management science. The science of business refers to the essential quantitative elements of business. Think of subjects like accounting, finance, statistical methods, economics, operations management. We graduates of business schools pride ourselves on our analytical approaches to business problems. We quantify things to the extent practicable. We organize our business around quantifiable goals, and we measure progress against those goals. And all that is, of course, absolutely essential, but it's simply not sufficient. Our understandable desire to reduce every business problem to measurable data often produces problems of its own. From my nearly 3 decades in the automobile business, I can tell you that rarely has there been a billion-dollar recall that came about because someone made a mistake. Each time a root cause analysis is done, usually going back 4 or 5 years, the companies find that the decision they wish wasn't made, but was made, was not at the time a wrong decision. Here's a simple example. With pressure to reduce the cost of an exhaust system, engineers determine, after reasonable testing, that the platinum loading in the catalytic converter can be slightly reduced. Platinum, as I think you all know, is the most common noble metal used to react with the toxic byproducts of combustion to produce cleaner emissions. That platinum reduction saves $3 per vehicle, which is a very significant cost reduction times millions of vehicles. 5 years later, the cars in question failed to meet in-use emission standards. The recall costs $125 per vehicle for each $3 saved. The engineer who met his cost targets 5 years earlier has since been promoted 3 times. The management system was simply incapable of measuring or even anticipating the knock-on effects of that engineering decision over time. It got exactly what it measured. It's true that every management system is, in fact, perfectly designed to get what it's getting. The problem is that senior management, who succeed in the existing system, can't see it. As one scholar observed, they are inside the frame and therefore unable to see the whole picture. In governments, federal, state, and local, where budget surpluses do not spill over to subsequent years, every agency finds ways to spend its full budget by year end. Otherwise, next year's budget will be reduced. In the process, we lock in wasteful spending. We get exactly what we measure. If executives are paid supplemental compensation based on earnings per share, they have a built-in incentive to undertake stock buybacks, which increase earnings per share without actually increasing earnings. Again, we get what we measure. Many companies have their people work in cross-functional teams, but a number of academic studies suggest that too many company teams are dysfunctional or inefficient. That's because the team members, representing their individual organizational functions, exhibit their primary loyalty to their home function and not to the team. Why? Because how their career progress will be determined is not altered when they take on a temporary team assignment. That loyalty is driven by their measurement system. Unless companies are willing to put their top folks on a cross-functional team and reward those people only if the team succeeds, there is no incentive for team members to go native. But picture this alternative scenario. The members of senior management actually agree to a cross-functional team arrangement that's based on these rules. Rule number 1, each function or discipline serves up its best people to serve on the team. Rule number 2, membership is voluntary. So if you're asked to serve, you don't have to serve with no consequences. Third, the potential team members are instructed how success will be measured for the team, so you know what the rules are. Fourth, they're told what resources and timetable the team will have. And finally, they're instructed that if the team fails, there will be no individual heroes. So in that environment, imagine how team behavior would change in line with the changes in the management system. If time permits, I'll tell you how we construct teams at school. So a key element of what I call the art of business is the ability to understand those management systems and to accommodate them to the realities of one's own organization, and where necessary, to ignore them to achieve the best result. The top person in an organization is the one being paid to optimize the whole. Everyone below him or her is usually paid to suboptimize. Consider this: if every single decision in an organization were brought to the CEO, he or she would likely make the best decision for the overall organization. But that's not practical. So the organization's people make the most rational decisions they can within the management systems inside which they work. And in most cases, rational decisions are shaped by the measurement system, not the overall welfare of the organization. The knock-on effects of decisions, as I call them, are difficult to quantify. Yet we need to train ourselves and the generations behind us to think horizontally. Business people, I submit, think vertically. Engineers and scientists think systemically, horizontally. Management must ask the difficult questions about whether a decision that seems justified at the moment, based on the available quantitative elements and evidence, will serve the balance of the organization well. Or will it cause serious hiccups down the line or over time? And what will its effects be not only on shareholders, but on employees, the community, and the physical environment? Horizontal thinking, as I'm calling it, also implies ethical decision-making because it considers all ramifications of decisions. Certainly, academics have a responsibility to help develop the systems, and that's now more possible because of technology, that will better measure or predict the organization-wide effects of individual decisions. There's not a lot of that kind of integrated research going on at top business schools, but there are some modest signs, like in the area of spreadsheet modeling, where new tools are being developed and taught. Making expedient settlements with labor unions to avoid work interruptions is also often fraught with long-term risks. Consider the U.S. auto industry's clever negotiating in the 1970s. Then healthcare coverage was offered in place of the higher wages being demanded by the UAW, because at the time, that seemed to be cost-effective. After the UAW won, which was then first dollar healthcare coverage, other major U.S. labor unions struck similar deals. Today we have a serious healthcare crisis, with healthcare costs now over 16% of GDP and rising. Prior to the 70s, healthcare costs ran closer to 7% of GDP. Having taken the free market out of the healthcare business, should it be a surprise that healthcare spending continues to increase? Most of us find it a lot easier to spend someone else's money than our own. We seem singularly incapable of assessing the knock-on effects of decisions because we're not trained to anticipate those issues. And it is very difficult. What I'm suggesting is not easy. And on an even greater macro basis, federal tax policy often dictates corporate behavior. There are many examples. I'll just give you one. The escalation in executive salaries is not unrelated to the government's enacting legislation in 1993 that capped the expensing of executive salaries in excess of $1 million cash. So, companies resorted to paying executives in stock options, restricted shares of stock or phantom stock units to compensate for the tax limitation on the cash portion of compensation. As the stock market soared through the 90s, with the influx of all the baby boomer retirement money, the practical effect was to compensate executives far more than would have been the case had the federal government not intervened. The high stock values established a new high going rate for senior executives that is now virtually irreversible. And in the latest SEC requirement to submit a detailed compensation discussion and analysis report with the annual proxy, the regulators want to know the name of the outside consultant used, what the consultant is paid to do, how the consultant's input is factored into compensation decisions, the names of peer companies used for compensation purposes, and the compensation philosophy of the organization. And you can read about all this because some of you have written them, I'm sure, but that's all now available in the current proxy round. That phenomenon, I submit, will certainly create the unintended consequence of building in never-ending escalation in salaries, irrespective of performance. No board wants its folks paid in the bottom 50% of its peer group. Everybody is above average. That's point one. So each time a comparative salary survey is done by a compensation consultant for any company, it has the effect of raising compensation. It's the Lake Wobegon effect. Everyone is above average. The measurement system itself effectively raises compensation. When a company seeking a new CEO comes upon an attractive candidate, it must buy him or her out of their stock options on which they're currently sitting. And as all of you know, the fair value formulas used to evaluate stock options always assume an eventual gain, when in the real world, options often die underwater and are worthless. Then to make the move worthwhile, with all the attendant risks associated with shrinking CEO tenure, the candidate negotiates some kind of make-whole provision if the assignment doesn't work out. What you then get are very large compensation settlements for what the world sees as failure. So I think you get the idea. In any case, trying to anticipate the knock-on effects of decisions at every level is extremely difficult, but it's essential if we are to manage more effectively. And by the way, I could leave the script for a moment to tell you that the CDNAs, which you've all helped write and are now all available, there are people, as I speak, huddling over them, competitive ones, laying out spreadsheets that fill in every block, right, of how the peer companies are paying their folks. So as that analysis is being done, some of you may be doing them yourself. HR people are doing them, consultants are doing them, compensation committees are doing this. Imagine which company now will reduce compensation based on this new data. And now imagine how many will increase compensation because we found that we're not comparable in X, Y, or Z category of compensation. So this is why I say that the CDNAs are going to have the unintended effect of actually raising compensation. But we'll see. I may be dead wrong about that. Obviously, the SEC is not intending that this be a device to raise compensation. It's trying to create transparency. But I think one of the unintended consequences is we're going to tell everybody everything about everything we do, and nobody will back off. They'll only find the hole to fill. I mentioned at the outset that the art of business also relates to a feel for a business or an informed intuition. One develops such a feel for a business by working in the bowels of a business, in the plant, the warehouse, the showroom floor. One does not develop a feel for a business simply doing staff-type analyses. An accounting professor with whom I was speaking recently told me that in his cost accounting classes, he advises that cost accountants should always do a reality check with the operating people. The example he gave was one of the accountant who determines that a given component costs $2.50. The cost accountant then communicates the $2.50 finding to the plant manager. If the plant manager responds, "can't be," the professor says the accountant then needs to go back and start over. The point he was making was that the operating people with a nose for the business may not be able to state with accuracy what the piece cost actually is, but they would know what it isn't. Another example of the limitations of quantitative analysis would be the failings of mergers and acquisitions. A number of academic studies have concluded that on average, mergers do not benefit the acquiring company's shareholders at above market rates. And yet no merger is entered into unless the acquirer is satisfied that the cost efficiencies and the synergies will benefit the shareholders. Now think about who's involved in mergers and acquisitions. They are some of the country's brightest business minds: investment bankers, top law firms, senior management, boards of directors, and the interested institutional investors, who today, by the way, control 75% of the publicly traded stock. The bankers crank the numbers every conceivable way. And from an intellectual standpoint, these investment bankers trained at the top business schools certainly think they understand the business. But what's missing is a nose for the business, for what will likely work and what won't. To understand that means to understand the customers, the suppliers, the competitors, the dealers or distributors, the labor environment, and the respective corporate cultures. You can't learn that in a business school. You need to get dirty, actually working in a business. Yet, what top MBA program advises or encourages its graduates to get a job on the assembly line, or on the showroom floor, or in the warehouse, after they've earned their prized MBA? Mergers usually fail because of the social issues, so-called. The relationship between the management teams, the geographical differences, the company cultures, witness the failure of the Daimler-Chrysler merger. It reminds me that when companies undertake CEO searches, and I've been involved in several of those, it's not hard to find bright, ambitious executives who know the financials and can make the trains run on time. What's really rare is to find a CEO who also has the ability to make rain, to expand the top line, rather than simply attempt to manage the bottom line. That intuition about revenue opportunities usually derives from a nose for the business. So here's a question: what business schools today offer courses in selling? Selling. Should it be a surprise then that there's no shortage of senior executives who know financial engineering, but a serious shortage of genuine business builders, rainmakers, as I call them? The art of business also includes the art of knowing one's self. Leadership is the force that makes the whole greater than the sum of the parts. The leader need not be the smartest guy or gal in the room. Bringing others to their full potential requires the leader know his or her own strengths and limitations. It requires that the leader be comfortable in his or her own skin. It involves knowing how to mediate differences, how to achieve consensus, how to be steadfast but not stubborn. It involves imagining possibilities for the organization and communicating that vision effectively. So it's fair to ask, I think, how, if at all, business schools attempt to teach these kinds of personal leadership skills. Now, for those of you who have been hanging on every word, you know I concluded the initial listing of the characteristics that describe the art of business with the expression, a genius for execution. There's no shortage of terrific business ideas of all kinds. There is a real shortage of people who can bring those ideas to commercial reality, the executors. I recall that about 15 years ago, the highest volume Lincoln Mercury dealership in America was Tasca Lincoln Mercury in Seaconk, Rhode Island, in the Providence metro market. What was confounding to car people was that this highest volume dealer also had the country's highest measured customer satisfaction. High satisfaction numbers were usually associated with small town, low volume dealerships where the customers and the dealership personnel all knew each other well, not big city, impersonal dealerships with huge volume moving through. Bob Tasca, the dealer and owner, would open his books and give tours of his operation to anyone who asked. So manufacturer representatives of every brand came through his place, as did fellow dealers from around the world and all of his competitors. One day I asked Bob if he wasn't concerned that he was sharing all his operating detail with his competitors. No, Bob replied, they're not me. And as I reflected on that, I realized that what Bob was saying was that what he did was not a secret. But the process and the procedures were owned by him, internalized in him, if you will. They were products of his vision for his business. So how he followed the work day in and day out, how the folks in the organization knew what was expected, how a passionate boss kept track of progress or shortcomings, that dedication to execution was the secret to his sustained success. That gift for implementation is what made all the difference. Anyone can copy a procedure or many procedures, but it's really hard to copy the fire in the belly. That's the genius of execution. 40 plus years ago, an old business school professor whom I now realize was younger than I am now, but I call him an old business school professor just the same, taught that between an A idea or an A execution of a B idea, always choose the latter. It wins every time, and that's still true. Referring again to a point I made at the outset, being effective in business requires rigorous quantitative and analytical ability and discipline. Without that, you're not even in the game. But that alone is not sufficient to minimize business errors. One must understand and appreciate the art of business and all that that implies. So at our School of Management, we work hard to fuse the art and science of business along with the technology that is so transforming business. Importantly, from the standpoint of current practitioners like yourselves, getting your brightest, high-potential people involved in the operation of a business early in their careers and placing a premium on operating skills in your own business can help prepare the next generation of builders and leaders. All this matters because business is a tremendous force for good, and every business can operate more effectively from the best to the not so good. As leaders in your own organizations, you need to be sensitive to your own management systems, what you're measuring, and what you're rewarding, and the behaviors that those systems generate, both good and not so good. As you identify people with potential for leadership, provide them with serious operating experience at every opportunity. Value execution as much as you value analysis. As academics and practitioners, we owe it to society to constantly seek to make our businesses more effective in bringing goods and services to market at the lowest real cost, with the highest possible quality, and in the fastest time. Free market capitalism, with all of its many warts, is far and away the most effective economic system ever, bringing the greatest good to the largest numbers of people, measured in terms of jobs created, quality of life, medical care, longevity, reduced infant mortality, philanthropy, the absence of child labor, general sanitation, access to modern conveniences, ease of travel, individual mobility, on and on and on. Kofi Annan had it right when he observed that poor countries are poor of business. So to the extent that we better prepare builders and leaders in both the art and the science of business, we raise the tide for all the boats, benefiting all the people who depend on us. That, I submit, is a very noble objective.